From beers to wine, from vodka to brandy, all being alcoholic drinks, but having their own history, science, and art. When was it made? Who drank it? How it influenced cultures, and how is it produced and served? Though these are the brands that we're most familiar about, there's one other type of alcohol that's more obscure and controversial: absinthe. If we are to put these drinks on a character analogy, beers would be like commoners. It's the most common seen person, not that strong on its own, and you need plenty of them in order to have a good time. Wines are like high-class people, whose craftsmanship has been corroded by consumerism. Vodkas are like the insane, affectionate types. They are soft on the outside, but they are tough inside. They can be good companions, but be sure not to become too attached to them or else you might regret it later. And then you have the black sheep of the family, Absinthe. She's prone to sneak out at night and hang out with her shady inner circle of friends to engage in out-of-the-box intellectual pursuits. She's also very controversial and someone not to be trusted by the rest of the population. Despite this, black sheep like Absinthe stand out from the rest of the crowd, giving it an interest of their own. For this is what this video will cover. What is Absinthe? What is her track record? And how has she impacted those around her? The word absinthe has its roots in the Greek word absintheon, meaning undrinkable. In the English language, it's called wormwood, which defined means a state or source of bitterness or grief. It's also a name given to a small shrub. This shrub, wormwood, has been used for many medicinal uses. According to the University of Evergreen, long before wormwood was used as a liqueur, it was used as a medicine for centuries, most notably by the ancient Egyptians. It proved effective in treating intestinal issues, including parasites. However, even at that time, prolonged use of the product was known to cause symptoms to worsen. It's important to keep in mind that this downside, when it's overused, is due to a principal substance found in wormwood, called thujon, and would play a huge role in the stigma surrounding absinthe drinking, having ties to causing nervous problems, hallucinations, seizures, epilepsy, and in worst cases, death. Indeed, wormwood had its good and bad sides, and this is a key ingredient in making absinthe. But there's one more ingredient, one that gives absinthe an allure: anise. It's used today in flavoring food, drinks, and medicine to soothe indigestion, giving it a strong licorice taste. There are people who say that anise in drinks creates a tantalizing, drowsy, and even sensual feeling. According to a 20th century writer in the book Absinthe, the Cocaine of the 20th Century by Doris Lanier, there's something about the spirits laced with absinthe that suggests overripe fruit on a hot summer's day. These drinks are not, of course, made of fruit or flowers, but simply of a natural spirit distilled from grain and flavored with anise. But the direct licorice-like taste and the smell, heady, rich, and a little brazen, instantly evoked an idyllic drowsiness. So these two ingredients, wormwood and anise, are the main pillars in creating absinthe, almost symbolic in a sense. With the life-risking hallucinogenic wormwood and the rich allurement of anise, it could be appropriate that absinthe can be defined as the death by desire. But the question remains: when, who, and how was it created? In 1769, there has been advertisement for a remedy out of Neuchâtel, Switzerland. It's called Bon Extract d'Absinthe, consisting of alcohol, aniseed, lemon balm, and wormwood. It promised to cure epilepsy, gout, kidney stones, colic, headaches, and worms. It would remain a remedy until 1790, when a French physician, Dr. Ordinaire, yes, that was actually his name, got a hold of the recipe, turning it into a stomach tonic, and soon got the nickname Le Vert Verte, the Green Fairy. Under Dr. Ordinaire, he built upon the recipe, using 136 proof alcohol, which became the traditional proof for real absinthe. Today, absinthe is made with a variety of herbs to accompany it, most prominently fennel, lemon balm, coriander, mint, and hyssop, which gives absinthe a very licorice, minty taste, almost like a strong herbal tea. Often the herbs are added in separately after wormwood goes through a careful distilling process. Interesting fact, wormwood right after it's distilled is clear, and gets its green coloration once the herbs are added to it. In 1797, the formula was sold to Major Toubeed, who with his son-in-law, Mr. H.L. Pernod, created the first absinthe factory in Cuvée, Switzerland, then another in France, commercializing the drink, propelling both Pernod and his company to high prestige that continues to this day. Though absinthe has now been commercialized, it will remain on the fringes due to its price and obscurity. But its eventual rise in popularity would start off with two social groups, the army and the intellectuals. French soldiers were introduced to the absinthe in the early 19th century during the French conquest of Algeria. They drank it to alleviate symptoms of fever, dysentery, and to purify water. When they returned home, they carried the desire for absinthe with them and encouraged saloons, cafes, and bistros to sell the drink. Demand would only skyrocket, as by 1870, wine vineyards across France experienced an epidemic of a parasite called phylloxera, destroying many of its vineyards. Absinthe for the next 30 years would come to take its place, with France consuming upwards of 36 million liters per year by 1910. To demonstrate how absinthe is served, it's traditional that two properties are involved: water to dilute it due to its high alcoholic percentage, and sugar to reduce its bitterness. Absinthe is poured into a special glass called a reservoir glass, usually above the bulb of the glass. I'll be keeping it under it due to it being, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. This is followed by an absinthe spoon that you will place on top of the glass with the sugar cube. The water is then slowly poured on top of the sugar cube. This process is used to help distribute the sugar with the water and absinthe. By then, it is now ready to be served. But to move on, it became almost an epidemic of its own, in places like Geneva, Zurich, Bern, Marseille, Lyon, and Paris, consuming the green fairy in gluttonous proportions. Whilst in the countryside, it was more tamed, treated like any other drink like wine or brandy. But in Paris alone, the home of 30,000 cafes, it was popular that by 5 p.m. would not be happy hour, but green hour. It was also common to consume absinthe with an appetizer, which accounted for 90% of them. And from France, the green fairy fluttered abroad, traveling to the French colonies, the Belgian Congo, South America, and finding prominence in a small U.S. town nicknamed Little Paris, New Orleans, where the old Absinthe house resides. As the name suggests, it was a hotspot for the drink, and many artists and writers like Oscar Wilde, Mark Twain, Walt Whitman, and occult poet Aleister Crowley would visit this house to pay homage to the Green Fairy. Speaking of, by the turn of the late 19th century, France was undergoing a cultural renaissance called Belle Époque. This was a time when art like Romanticism, Realism, and Bohemianism were ready to take flight, and it would be to the help of the Green Fairy that would give them their wings. At this time, absinthe was a symbol of inspiration and daring. The ritualistic preparations, its obscure properties, and allegedly psychoactive effects was romanticized by many artists and writers as a means of releasing that creative spirit locked within themselves. This included Van Gogh, Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec, Picasso, Charles Baudelaire, Oscar Wilde, Edgar Allan Poe, and Ernest Hemingway, all being absinthe drinkers, many finding their inspiration in its consumption, whether they realize it or not. One documented statement of absinthe comes from Wilde, who said, "The first stage is like ordinary drinking. The second, when you begin to see monstrous and cruel things. But if you can persevere, you will enter upon a third stage, where you see things that you want to see. Wonderful, curious things." This can be viewed allegorically, as the Green Fairy always carries a contract for her blessings. One notorious example was Van Gogh. Though it's false to believe that the fairy made him go mad, as he suffered from previous mental and alcoholic issues, it's true that he was an excessive acid drinker, even going as far as to drink turpentine. Interesting fact, the wormwood chemical, thujol, is a terpene. Another example is Paul Verlaine, a famous poet for writing about taboo subjects alongside symbolism and decadence. He would become a slave to his embrace, a toll best shown in this last photograph of him months before his death. But before then, he wrote these words: "Absurdities which I owe my abuse of this horrible drink, this abuse itself, the source of folly and crime, of idiocy and shame, which governments should tax heavily if they do not suppress it altogether. Absinthe. The fate of Varline can be seen as a foreshadowing, as by the turn of the 20th century, absinthe became extremely available, till even the working class drank of it. But already, the dark side of absinthe was becoming noticeable. An extended pamphlet called Absinthe and Absinthers was written by Henry Ballista, who documented the social effects of the drink, and writing a heartfelt anti-absinthe appeal. What seems first as a minuscule, insignificant appeal would go on to be cited continuously by a growing movement called the temperance movement. Then there was the French physicianist, Dr. Valentin Magnin, who demonized it by defining its effects as absinthism, causing hyperexcitability, epileptic fits, hallucinations, and birth defects. By then, it seemed that the general public that absinthe was generally making societies worse off. Politicians targeted it as a product that might cause the working class to revolt. Puritans attacked it as a poison that harms families. Even wine sellers went after attacking it, wanting to restore their former glory. All of which, alongside the growing temperance movement, made absinthe feel extremely demonized. The best example of this outcry can be best seen in the Quebec Blue Cross petition of 1907. Gathering 400,000 signatures, it reads, "Absinthe makes you crazy and criminal, provokes epilepsy and tuberculosis, and has killed thousands of French people. It makes a furious beast of men, a martyr of women, and a degenerate of the infant. It disorganizes and ruins the family, and menaces the future of the country." The nail in the coffin would soon come in the form of a murder in communist Switzerland, where on August 28, 1905, Jane Lanfrey, an avid drunkard, murdered both his pregnant wife and daughter with a shotgun. This was the last straw, and from now on, the Green Fairy became known as the Green Witch. Belgium would be the first to ban it in 1908. Then Switzerland passed Article 32 in 1910, banning the production and selling of absinthe, followed by the US 2 years later, then France in 1915, and soon the rest of Europe followed. For at long last, it seemed that the Green Witch was finally burnt at the stake. Close to a century, absinthe would be illegal, with only fringe substitutes being active. But by 1981, a rebirth began to take hold. Germany was the first to lift the ban of absinthe, and soon the Czech Republic in 1987, then in Switzerland in 2005, and finally absinthe would become available in the US in 2007. This was thanks to the help of modern researchers who took a serious look into the symptoms and whether those same claims hold true now. It was found that the past beliefs of absinthe making you hallucinate and an aphrodisiac was debunked. In reality, it's nothing more than a hard liquor, typically between 45 and 74% alcohol, slightly more stronger than vodka. Not only that, but the main chemical property, thujon, was proven to be not that powerful of a hallucinogenic, for you're more likely to suffer its alcoholic poisoning than you would from the high thujon levels. According to an article published in the peer-reviewed journal Substance Abuse Treatment Prevention and Policy, it is concluded that chronic abuse of absinthe did not cause any distinct syndrome. The so-called absinthism cannot exactly be distinguished from chronic alcoholism. The literature gives proof that the thujon concentrations of pre-ban absinthes were not able to cause such toxic effects, e.g. seizures, that were found in animal experiments such as pure wormwood extracts. The possibility remains that other constituents found within wormwood or other ingredients of absinthe may cause potential health problems. The paucity of good scientific studies about absinthe, especially in the realm of chronic human consumption and long-term effects of thujon-containing beverages, must again be pointed out. To avoid such dangers, in the US, thujon levels are capped at 10 milligrams per liter, while in Europe it's capped at 35 milligrams per liter. So, there remains one question. Was absinthe given a fair treatment? Well, sort of. It's true that back in those days, alcohols like absinthe were prone to abuse, especially since how low regulation was in production. Even the most shady distillers would lace absinthe with copper sulfate for coloration. Also, many of the advertisements about its effects were greatly exaggerated by both its attackers and its sellers. which may have led to its excessive indulgence and early ban. But on the bright side, absinthe nowadays is accepted. There are plenty of brands to experience, and thanks to services like the FDA, absinthe is free from shady practices. For the Green Witch has been burnt, but the fairy lives on.